Olivia Bennet stood in front of her bedroom mirror, pinching at the sides of her flowery dress that hugged her curves too tightly for her stepmother's liking. The clock on her wall ticked loudly, reminding her that in just 15 minutes she would need to be downstairs for yet another one of her family's fancy parties. She sighed, running her fingers through her chestnut brown hair. At 23, she should have felt like a confident young woman, but years of subtle comments and disappointed looks had whittled away at her self-image. "Olivia, are you ready yet?" Her stepmother's shrill voice echoed up the stairs. "The Morgensterns are already here." Olivia took one last look at herself. The dress wasn't actually that bad. In fact, she thought the color brought out the warmth in her eyes. But she already knew what Eleanor would say. Something about how the fabric pulled in all the wrong places, or how she should really consider wearing something more slimming. "Coming." She called back, slipping on a pair of low heels. The less height she added to her already tall frame, the better, according to Eleanor. Downstairs, the family's grand living room had been transformed into a sophisticated venue for tonight's fundraiser. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier light. White-gloved servers carried trays of tiny appetizers, and Eleanor Bennet stood in the center of it all, draped in a designer gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Eleanor's face tightened into what Olivia recognized as her public smile when she spotted her stepdaughter descending the stairs. "There you are, darling," she said, voice sweet but eyes critical. "I was beginning to worry." "Sorry, I was just finishing up," Olivia replied softly. "Well, do try to mingle, won't you? And perhaps stick to the vegetable platter tonight. Mrs. Richardson was just telling me about this wonderful new diet program." Olivia nodded politely, already tuning out Eleanor's thinly veiled suggestion. She'd heard variations of it throughout her life, especially since her father had remarried when she was 13, bringing Eleanor and her obsession with appearances into their once warm home. As she made her way through the crowd, Olivia spotted her father deep in conversation with several men in expensive suits. Richard Bennet rarely had time for his daughter these days, too consumed with his investment banking career and keeping his younger wife happy. He glanced up briefly, giving Olivia a distracted wave before returning to what appeared to be an intense business discussion. For the next hour, Olivia did what she always did at these events. She smiled at the right moments, laughed politely at unfunny jokes, and tried to make herself as unnoticeable as possible. She had just decided to escape to the garden for some fresh air when a server walked by with a tray of red wine. "Would you care for a drink, miss?" he asked. Olivia wasn't much of a drinker, but the thought of getting through another 2 hours of this party completely sober seemed unbearable. "Yes, thank you," she said, reaching for a glass. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As she took the wine, someone bumped into her from behind. Olivia stumbled forward, the glass tilting in her hand. Before she could regain her balance, the dark red liquid splashed directly onto the cream-colored designer dress of none other than Mrs. Abigail Waters, wife of the evening's guest of honor and biggest potential donor to Eleanor's charity foundation. The room fell. Silent, Mrs. Waters let out a dramatic gasp, looking down at the growing stain on her dress in horror. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry," Olivia stammered, grabbing a napkin from a nearby table and instinctively moving to help. "Don't touch it," Mrs. Waters snapped, stepping back. "This is an original Valentino." Eleanor appeared instantly, as if summoned by the scent of social disaster. "Abigail, I am absolutely mortified," she said, shooting a venomous glance at Olivia while guiding Mrs. Waters away. "Let's get you to the powder room immediately. I have some club soda that might help." The party resumed its chatter, but Olivia could feel dozens of eyes on her, could hear the whispers and poorly concealed laughs. She retreated to a corner, face burning with embarrassment. 20 minutes later, Eleanor found her. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Her stepmother's voice was low and tight, her smile still plastered on for anyone who might be watching. Patrick Waters was about to commit a 6-figure donation to the foundation. Now his wife is leaving and he's going with her. "I didn't mean to." "You never do you?" Eleanor cut her off. "You never mean to embarrass this family, and yet somehow you manage it so consistently." Olivia felt her throat tighten. "It was an accident." "Your entire existence in this family feels like an accident sometimes," Eleanor muttered, then immediately composed herself. "Your father and I will discuss this when we get home. For now, just stay out of sight. That night, after all the guests had gone and the catering staff had cleared away the evidence of the evening's festivities, Olivia sat on the edge of her bed, listening to the heated voices coming from her father's study downstairs. She's completely hopeless in social situations, Richard. Tonight was just the final straw. Eleanor's voice carried easily through the old house's vents. She's young. She made a mistake, her father replied, though his defense sounded weak and tired. She's 23 years old. Most girls her age have jobs, ambition, social graces. What does Olivia have? A degree in business she's never used, no friends to speak of, and apparently, an inability to hold a wine glass properly. The conversation continued, growing in intensity. Olivia pulled a pillow over her head but couldn't block out Eleanor's final proclamation. She needs to learn about consequences, Richard. She needs to understand what the real world is like, not this cushioned existence where Daddy fixes everything. The following morning, Olivia was summoned to her father's study. Eleanor sat perched on the arm of his leather chair looking smugly victorious. Richard Bennett looked older than his 55 years, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. Olivia, we've made a decision, he began, not quite meeting her eyes. Eleanor has a solution that I think might benefit everyone. Eleanor smiled thinly. My old family friend Thomas Miller has a small farm about 3 hours from here. He's been looking for some help and I've arranged for you to go and work for him. Olivia blinked in confusion. You want me to work on a farm? For 6 months, Eleanor continued smoothly. It will teach you responsibility, work ethic, and frankly might help with your physical condition as well. All that fresh air and physical labor does wonders. But I don't know anything about farming, Olivia protested, looking to her father for support. Richard sighed, running a hand over his thinning hair. I think your stepmother has a point, Liv. You've been drifting since college. Maybe this is exactly what you need. A change of perspective, learning the value of hard work. So I'm being punished? Sent away because I spilled wine on someone's dress? Olivia felt tears threatening but held them back. She wouldn't give Eleanor the satisfaction. Don't be so dramatic, Eleanor said dismissively. It's an opportunity. Thomas is expecting you tomorrow morning. I suggest you start packing. The next day dawned gray and rainy, matching Olivia's mood perfectly as she stood in the driveway watching the family driver load her 2 suitcases into the car. She had spent the night alternating between anger and disbelief, packing the few practical clothes she owned and wondering what exactly awaited her. Eleanor hadn't bothered to get up to say goodbye, but her father stood awkwardly on the front steps, hands in his pockets. It's only 6 months. Liv, he said, giving her a quick, stiff hug. Try to make the best of it. Olivia nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice breaking. As the car pulled away from the only home she'd ever known, she caught a final glimpse of her father in the rearview mirror. He had already turned to go back inside, shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. The drive seemed endless, the landscape gradually changing from suburban neighborhoods to rolling countryside. The rain continued steadily, painting everything in muted grays and greens. The driver, who had known Olivia since she was a child, kept glancing at her in the mirror. You all right back there, Miss Bennett? He asked finally. Olivia forced a smile. I'm fine, George. Just nervous, I guess. If it helps any, I grew up on a farm, he offered. Hard work but honest. Sometimes that's better than all those fancy parties with people who don't mean what they say. She appreciated his attempt at comfort, but couldn't shake the feeling that she was being exiled, discarded like an embarrassing family secret. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the car turned down a narrow dirt road that had become muddy in the rain. At the end stood a modest 2-story farmhouse, white paint peeling slightly at the corners, a covered porch wrapping around the front. A small barn and several fenced areas were visible behind it. Nothing grand, nothing that screamed success or wealth. As the car came to a stop, a tall figure emerged from the house, wearing a rain jacket and work boots. Thomas Miller stepped onto the porch just as George opened Olivia's door and retrieved her luggage from the trunk. This is as far as I go, Miss Bennett, George said quietly. Good luck to you. And just like that, Olivia stood alone in the rain, watching the family car disappear back down the muddy road, leaving her at the mercy of a stranger and whatever punishment her stepmother had arranged for her. The rain pattered against Olivia's jacket as she stood awkwardly in the driveway, her 2 suitcases at her feet slowly sinking into the mud. The tall figure on the porch hadn't moved yet, just watching her with an unreadable expression. Finally, he stepped down and walked toward her, rain dripping from the brim of his worn baseball cap. "You must be Olivia," he said, his voice deeper than she expected, with a slight country drawl that hadn't been smoothed away by education or city living. "I'm Thomas Miller." Up close, she could see he was probably in his late 30s with sun-weathered skin and the kind of lean, wiry build that comes from physical work rather than gym memberships. His eyes were a surprising shade of blue, not cold like Eleanor's, but clear and direct. "Hello," she managed, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she must look in her city boots and jacket that was clearly not meant for actual rain. Without another word, Thomas picked up both her suitcases with ease. "Let's get you inside before you catch cold." Olivia followed him up the porch steps, noticing how the wood creaked under their weight. The house looked even smaller up close, nothing like the mansion she'd grown up in. Thomas pushed open the front door and led her into a cozy living room with mismatched furniture that had seen better days. "It's not fancy," he said, setting down her bags, "but it's warm and dry." A wood stove in the corner gave off gentle heat, and Olivia found herself drawn to it automatically, her damp clothes chilling her skin. "Your stepmother didn't exactly explain why she was sending you here," Thomas said, hanging his wet cap on a hook by the door. "Just said you needed to learn some responsibility." Olivia felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I spilled wine on someone important at a fundraiser. Apparently that warrants a 6-month exile to the middle of nowhere." She regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth, expecting him to be offended, but to her surprise Thomas just let out a short laugh. "Rich people problems," he said, but there was no real malice in his tone. "Well, I do need help around here, so I guess we both get something out of this arrangement." He showed her to a small bedroom at the back of the house. It was simple but clean, with a twin bed covered in a handmade quilt, a dresser, and a small desk beneath a window that looked out over fields that disappeared into the rainy mist. "Bathroom's down the hall," Thomas explained. "Water takes a minute to heat up, so be patient with it. I'll let you get settled. Dinner's at 6. With that, he left her alone. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, listening to his footsteps recede down the hallway. The enormity of her situation finally hit her. She was miles from anything familiar, staying with a complete stranger, about to begin 6 months of what Eleanor had gleefully described as character-building manual labor. She allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry, then wiped her face, unpacked her things, and changed into dry clothes. Whatever this experience was going to be, she would face it with what little dignity she had left. Dinner was a simple affair of pot roast, potatoes, and carrots that Thomas had apparently prepared himself. Olivia picked at her food, her appetite diminished by the day's stress. "Not used to country cooking?" Thomas asked, noticing her hesitation. "No, it's good," she said quickly. "I'm just not very hungry." Thomas nodded, not pressing the issue. "Tomorrow I'll show you around the place, get you started with your chores. Nothing too difficult at first. You ever done any kind of farm work before?" Olivia shook her head. "The closest I've come to gardening is arranging flowers for one of my stepmother's dinner parties." "Well, this'll be a bit different," he said with a hint of amusement. "Early mornings, physical work. But you'll catch on. Most people do." That night, Olivia lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the rain continue its steady drumming on the roof. The mattress was firmer than her plush one at home, and the sheets smelled of sunshine and fresh air rather than expensive fabric softener. Despite her anxiety about what the next day would bring, the rhythmic sound of the rain and the day's emotional exhaustion soon pulled her into a deep sleep. Morning arrived with cruel brightness, sunlight streaming through curtains she'd forgotten to close. For a moment, Olivia was disoriented. Then the previous day's events came flooding back. A rooster crowed somewhere nearby, and she could hear movement downstairs. Checking her phone, she was shocked to see it was only 5:30 a.m. By the time she dressed and made her way to the kitchen, Thomas had already been up for an hour, judging by the empty coffee mug in the sink and the list he was writing at the table. "Morning," he said, glancing up. "Hope you slept okay. Coffee's still hot if you want some." Olivia nodded gratefully, finding a mug in the cabinet and pouring herself some of the strong black liquid. "Do you always get up this early?" she asked, trying not to sound as groggy as she felt. "This is sleeping in for me," he replied with a small smile. "Animals don't care if it's Sunday or if you're tired. They need feeding every day, same time." After a simple breakfast of toast and eggs, Thomas led her outside. In the morning light, Olivia could finally see the full extent of the farm, though extensive wasn't the word she would use. There was the main house, the small barn she'd noticed yesterday, a chicken coop, a modest vegetable garden, and what looked like a workshop of some kind. Beyond that were a few acres of fields with what Thomas explained were early spring crops just beginning to sprout. "It's not much," he said, almost apologetically, "but it keeps me busy." The tour continued with introductions to the farm's animal residents: 6 chickens, 2 goats named Butter and Scotch, an elderly horse called Penny, and a border collie who came bounding up to them, tail wagging furiously. "And this is Daisy," Thomas said as the dog circled them excitedly. "She's supposed to be a working dog, but she's more interested in belly rubs than herding." As if understanding his words, Daisy promptly flopped onto her back at Olivia's feet, looking up expectantly. Despite herself, Olivia smiled and knelt to pet the friendly dog, earning an enthusiastic lick on her hand. "She likes you," Thomas observed. "That's a good sign. Daisy's usually a good judge of character." The rest of the morning was spent learning her daily chores, collecting eggs from the chicken coop, terrifying at first, but less so once she realized the hens were more afraid of her than she was of them, feeding the animals and helping to weed the vegetable garden. By noon, Olivia's back ached. Her hands were dirty despite the gloves Thomas had given her, and she had sweated through her cotton shirt. "You're doing better than I expected," Thomas commented as they stopped for lunch, sandwiches eaten on the porch steps. "Most city folks give up after the first chicken encounter." "I'm stubborn," Olivia replied, surprising herself with the admission. "And I don't have much choice, do I?" Thomas studied her for a moment. "Everyone has choices. Your stepmom arranged this, but you could have refused." "Called her bluff?" Olivia laughed humorlessly. "You don't know Eleanor. There is no calling her bluff. Besides, my father agreed with her, as usual." "Parents can make mistakes too," Thomas said quietly. "Sometimes the worst ones think they're doing what's best." There was something in his tone that made Olivia wonder about his own story, but it didn't seem like the right time to ask. Instead, she changed the subject. "What else needs doing this afternoon?" The first week passed in a blur of new experiences and muscle aches Olivia hadn't known were possible. She fell into bed each night exhausted, too tired even to check her phone, which rarely had service anyway. No one from home had called or messaged to check on her, not even her father, and she told herself she didn't care. Gradually, she began to adjust to the routine. Wake up at dawn, help with morning chores, eat breakfast, work until lunch, more work in the afternoon, dinner. Then a few hours of free time before sleep claimed her. Thomas was a patient teacher, never commenting when she made mistakes, simply showing her the correct way and moving on. By the second week, Olivia noticed her clothes fitting differently. Her jeans were looser around the waist, and she had to tighten her belt an extra notch. The physical labor was changing her body, but strangely, she didn't feel the usual shame that accompanied thoughts about her size. There was something different about earning her exhaustion through meaningful work, rather than punishing gym sessions, meant only to conform to Eleanor's ideals. One evening, after a particularly long day replanting part of the vegetable garden, Olivia found Thomas sitting on the porch, whittling a piece of wood with a small knife. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and Daisy lay contentedly at his feet. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. He gestured to the empty chair beside him. "It's a free country." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the colors in the sky deepened and the first stars appeared. It occurred to Olivia that she couldn't remember the last time she'd actually noticed a sunset. In the city, buildings blocked the horizon, and she was usually too busy with whatever social obligation Eleanor had thrust upon her to pay attention to nature's daily artwork. "What are you making?" she finally asked, nodding toward the piece of wood in his hands. "Just a little carving. Helps me think." He held it up. A small figure of a dog was beginning to emerge from the pale wood, something to keep my hands busy in the evenings. "It's nice," she said. "I wish I had a talent like that." Thomas glanced at her. "Everyone's got talents. Maybe you just haven't found yours yet. According to my stepmother, my only talent is embarrassing the family," Olivia said with a bitter laugh. "No offense, but your stepmother sounds like a real piece of work," Thomas replied, continuing his careful carving. What kind of person sends their kid to a stranger's farm as punishment? Stepkid, Olivia corrected. And she's always been like this. Nothing I do is ever good enough. I'm too fat, too quiet, too clumsy, too me. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. You know, he finally said, I've needed help around here for a while, but I never hired anyone. Too used to doing things my own way, I guess. When your stepmother called out of the blue talking about sending you here, I almost said no. Why didn't you? Olivia asked, curious. He shrugged. She mentioned your name, said you needed to learn some real-world lessons. Something about the way she said it, like you were a problem to be solved. It didn't sit right with me. Figured if she was that eager to ship you off, maybe you could use a break from her. Olivia wasn't sure what to say to that. The idea that this virtual stranger had shown more consideration for her feelings than her own family was both comforting and deeply sad. Well, she said finally, thank you for taking me in, even if it was originally meant as a punishment. Thomas nodded, returning his attention to his carving. Life has a funny way of turning punishments into opportunities sometimes. Just depends on how you look at it. As the third week began, Olivia found herself looking forward to the simple rhythms of farm life. The animals no longer intimidated her. In fact, she'd developed a special fondness for the goats who would come running whenever she approached their pen. The garden soil felt good between her fingers, and there was something deeply satisfying about nurturing growing things. Thomas had gradually given her more responsibilities, apparently trusting her capabilities more than she did herself. When she successfully built a new nesting box for the chickens using the tools in his workshop, the pride she felt was unlike anything she'd experienced before. Not bad for a city girl, Thomas had commented, inspecting her work. Coming from him, it felt like high praise. What Olivia couldn't know, was that the poor farm she was adapting to was merely a tiny corner of a much larger operation. Just beyond the ridge behind the house, hidden from her daily routines, lay the true extent of Thomas Miller's agricultural empire. Thousands of acres of prime farmland, modern equipment worth millions, and dozens of employees managing crops that supplied major food distributors across the region. And every evening, when Olivia retired to her small bedroom, Thomas would walk up that ridge and look out over his domain, wondering how long he should maintain the charade, and what Eleanor Bennett's true motives had been in sending her stepdaughter to him. 3 months had passed since Olivia first arrived at Thomas Miller's farm. The early summer morning was already warm as she collected eggs from the chicken coop, chatting softly to the hens as she worked. Her movements were confident now, no longer the hesitant fumbling of a city girl afraid to get her hands dirty. The chickens barely noticed her presence, a far cry from the squawking, flapping panic her approach had once caused. "Good morning, ladies," she said, gently reaching beneath a particularly grumpy hen. "I promise I'll be quick." Her basket full, Olivia headed back toward the house, pausing to check on the vegetable garden she'd come to think of as partly her own. The tomato plants were thriving, their green fruits just beginning to blush red in places. She'd learned to take pride in these small victories. Seeds sprouting, animals thriving, repairs holding firm. As she rounded the corner of the house, she spotted Thomas loading tools into his old pickup truck. In the months she'd been here, she'd grown comfortable with him, even fond of his quiet ways and dry humor. They'd developed an easy working relationship, with Thomas teaching and Olivia eagerly learning everything from fixing fences to baking bread in his ancient oven. "Heading out?" she asked, setting down her basket on the porch. Thomas nodded. "Need to pick up some supplies in town. Should be back by lunch." "I can make that potato soup you like," Olivia offered. Her cooking skills had improved dramatically since arriving, another source of quiet satisfaction. "Sounds good," he replied with a small smile. "There's a list of chores on the kitchen table. Nothing urgent, just if you get bored." After Thomas drove away, Olivia went inside and found his list. Feed animals, already done. Check the north fence for any damage from last night's storm. Water the seedlings in the small greenhouse behind the barn. Simple tasks she now knew how to handle without supervision. She decided to tackle the fence check first, whistling for Daisy to join her. The border collie appeared instantly, tail wagging with excitement at the prospect of an adventure. "Come on, girl," Olivia said, grabbing a few basic tools. "Let's go see if that old fence held up." Together they set off, following the fence line that ran along the northern edge of what Olivia understood to be Thomas's property. The recent storm had been fierce, with lightning and strong winds that had kept her awake well past midnight. But the morning was beautiful, the air washed clean and the grass sparkling with leftover raindrops. As they walked, Olivia reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few months. Her clothes now hung loose on her frame, but for once she didn't obsess over her body. The weight loss had been a side effect of hard work and healthy eating, not the punishing diets Eleanor had always pushed on her. More importantly, she had discovered strength she never knew she possessed, both physical and mental. When they reached the far corner of the fence, Olivia spotted a tree branch that had fallen across the wire, bending it toward the ground. "That's not good," she murmured to Daisy, who sniffed curiously at the damage. She set to work removing the branch, a task that would have seemed impossible to the Olivia who had arrived here in April. Now she simply assessed the situation, figured out the best approach, and got to work. As she dragged the last piece of branch away, she noticed something odd about the land beyond the fence. The property she'd come to know consisted of the small farmhouse, barn, animal pens, and a few modest fields. Beyond that, she'd assumed there was just more wilderness or perhaps neighboring farms. But from this vantage point, she could see what looked like perfectly maintained rows of crops stretching into the distance, much more extensive and organized than anything on Thomas's small farm. Curious, Olivia decided to follow a narrow path that led up a gentle slope beyond the fence line. Perhaps she could get a better view from higher ground. Daisy trotted alongside her, occasionally darting ahead to investigate interesting scents. When they reached the top of the hill, Olivia stopped short, her breath catching in her throat. Spread out before her was not wild countryside or small neighboring farms, but a vast agricultural operation. Immaculate fields stretched as far as she could see, with modern irrigation systems running between them. In the distance, she spotted large equipment sheds and what appeared to be a processing facility of some kind. And beyond that, partially hidden by a grove of trees, stood a grand house that made her family's mansion look modest in comparison. "What in the world?" she whispered, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Daisy whined softly, picking up on her confusion. Olivia patted the dog's head absently, her mind racing. Had she somehow wandered onto someone else's property? But that didn't make sense. The path she'd followed seemed well used, and Daisy had shown no hesitation, as if she knew the route well. In the distance, Olivia spotted a group of people working near one of the equipment sheds. As she watched, a figure separated from the group and appeared to be looking in her direction. After a moment, the person began walking toward her. Olivia's first instinct was to run back to the safety of the farmhouse, but curiosity kept her rooted to the spot. As the figure drew closer, she realized with a shock that it was Thomas, but not quite the Thomas she knew. This Thomas wore clean work clothes rather than his usual worn attire, and he carried himself differently, with an air of authority she hadn't seen before. "I see you've discovered the rest of the operation," he said when he reached her, his expression unreadable. "The rest of—" Olivia struggled to find words. "What is all this? Whose land is this?" "It's mine," Thomas said simply. "All of it." Olivia stared at him, trying to process this information. "But the small farm, the old truck, you said—" "I never actually said I was poor," Thomas interrupted gently. "That was your stepmother's description, not mine." Anger and confusion surged through Olivia as the pieces began to fall into place. "So this whole time you've been what? Playing at being a struggling farmer? Watching me fumble around with chickens and vegetable gardens when you have this?" She gestured at the expanse of land before them. Thomas had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "It's complicated." "Uncomplicate it," Olivia demanded, crossing her arms. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The caretaker's cottage and what you know as my house, and the small farm around it were where I grew up. My father started with just those few acres, working himself to the bone to provide for our family. Over the years, he gradually bought more land, expanded operations. By the time I took over after his death, Miller Agricultural had become one of the largest farming operations in the region. And you didn't think to mention this small detail?" Olivia's voice rose with indignation. "When Eleanor called me out of the blue after 15 years of no contact, talking about sending her troublesome stepdaughter to learn some humility on my poor little farm, I was—" "Curious," Thomas admitted. I wanted to understand what kind of game she was playing. Olivia felt sick to her stomach. So I've been what? Some kind of social experiment to you? The pampered rich girl you could laugh at while she struggled with farm chores? No, Thomas said firmly. That's not it at all. At first, I just didn't correct Eleanor's assumption about my circumstances. I figured she was up to something and I wanted to know what before showing my hand. And after? These past 3 months? Olivia gestured between them. What's your excuse for lying to me all this time? Thomas looked genuinely regretful. By the time I realized Eleanor had simply wanted to humiliate you by sending you away, you were already settling in, learning skills, finding your confidence. I didn't want to disrupt that. How considerate, Olivia said bitterly. So while I've been thinking I was helping some struggling farmer make ends meet, you've been, what, running a multi-million-dollar agricultural empire on the side? Essentially, yes, Thomas acknowledged. Though I do personally oversee the organic section we've been working on together. That part is real. It's become a pet project of mine. Olivia laughed humorlessly. Well, I feel completely stupid now. Thank you for that. You shouldn't, Thomas said, taking a step toward her. Everything you've learned, everything you've accomplished, that's all real, Olivia. Your hard work, your growing skills, the confidence you've built, none of that changes because my operation is bigger than you thought. Olivia turned away from him, needing space to think. Her gaze swept over the immaculate fields, the modern equipment, the grand house in the distance. All this time she'd been living in what amounted to the servants' quarters of a vast estate, never suspecting that her host was playing a role. Does everyone know? She asked suddenly, turning back to face him. Your workers, the people in town, have they all been in on the joke? Thomas shook his head. Most of my employees work on this side of the property. They know I sometimes stay at the old farmhouse, but they don't know about you. And in town, most people just know me as Tom, who lives out on the old Miller place. I've always kept a low profile. Why? Olivia asked, genuinely puzzled. If you're this successful, why hide it? Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. Money changes how people see you, how they treat you. Surely you of all people understand that? The comment hit home. Olivia had grown up with wealth and had seen firsthand how people behaved around her family. The false friendliness, the constant angling for favors or connections. Her father's money had colored every relationship in her life, especially after Eleanor entered the picture and doubled down on the importance of social standing. So what happens now? She asked, suddenly feeling very tired. I pack my bags and go home to tell Eleanor that her great punishment backfired because I actually enjoyed learning to be self-sufficient. Or, Thomas said carefully, you could stay, finish out the 6 months as planned, but with full knowledge of the situation and perhaps a different role. What kind of role? Olivia asked warily. Thomas gestured toward the main operation. I meant what I said about being impressed by your work ethic and quick learning. You have a business degree you've never used, right? This is a business, a big one. Maybe there's a place for those skills here. Olivia was silent, considering. Part of her wanted to storm back to the farmhouse, pack her things, and demand to be taken to the nearest bus station. But another part, a stronger part, was intrigued by the possibility Thomas was offering. A chance to prove her capabilities in a real-world setting, far from Eleanor's critical eye. I need time to think, she said finally. Thomas nodded. Take all the time you need. Nothing has to change right away. They walked back down the hill in silence, Daisy trotting between them as if sensing the tension. When they reached the farmhouse, Thomas paused. For what it's worth, I am sorry for not being straightforward with you from the beginning, he said. But I'm not sorry you came here, Olivia. Whatever Eleanor's intentions were in sending you, I think you found something valuable. I'd hate to see you throw that away because of my mistake. Olivia didn't respond, just continued into the house and closed the door behind her, leaving Thomas standing in the yard. Inside, she leaned against the wall, emotions swirling too chaotically to process. Betrayal, anger, and confusion mingled with an unexpected feeling of opportunity. She moved to the small bedroom that had become hers, looking at it with new eyes. The modest furnishings, the handmade quilt, the view of the vegetable garden from the window, all of it felt different now, knowing it was just a tiny corner of a much larger world that had been deliberately hidden from her. On the dresser sat the little wooden dog Thomas had carved that evening on the porch, which he'd given to her a few days later. She picked it up, running her fingers over the smooth surface. Was any of it real? The quiet conversations, the patient teachings, the gradual building of trust between them. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, the carved figure still in her hand. Through the window, she could see the familiar landscape of the small farm, the chicken coop where she'd conquered her fears, the garden where she'd learned to nurture living things, the workshop where she'd discovered she could build and repair with her own hands. Beyond the ridge lay another world entirely, one of wealth and business and complexity. A world not so different from the one she'd left behind in some ways, yet fundamentally changed by her own transformation these past months. The question now was which world she would choose to inhabit for the remainder of her time here, or whether she would choose to stay at all for 3 days after discovering the truth about Thomas's farm. Olivia barely spoke to him. She continued her chores mechanically, taking care of the animals and tending the garden, but the easy companionship they'd developed had evaporated, replaced by tense silence and avoided glances. On the morning of the 4th day, Olivia woke before dawn, her mind made up after hours of sleepless consideration. She found Thomas in the kitchen, coffee already brewed, staring out the window at the first hints of sunrise. "I want to see all of it," she said without preamble. Thomas turned, surprise evident on his face. "Good morning to you too. The farm, your actual farm. I want to see everything, understand how it works." Olivia crossed her arms, her stance determined. "If I'm going to stay for the remaining 3 months, I'm not playing pretend anymore." A cautious hope flickered across Thomas's features. "You're staying then?" "For now," she replied, not giving him too much satisfaction. "But on my terms. No more lies, no more half-truths." "Fair enough," he nodded, setting down his coffee mug. "We can start the tour after breakfast." An hour later, they were driving across the property in Thomas's truck. Not the old, rusted pickup he used around the small farmhouse, but a newer model with the Miller Agricultural logo on the door. Olivia sat silently, taking in the vastness of the operation as Thomas explained its various components. "We've got just over 3,000 acres total," he said as they drove past seemingly endless rows of corn. "About 70% is dedicated to traditional crops, including corn, wheat, soybeans. The rest is split between specialty organic produce, experimental sustainable farming methods, and land we're letting lie fallow to recover." They stopped at a massive barn where several workers were loading crates of vegetables onto a refrigerated truck. Thomas greeted them by name, introducing Olivia simply as someone who'll be working with us for a while. The easy respect with which the employees treated him was telling, not fearful deference to a wealthy boss, but the genuine regard earned by a fair leader. Next came the processing facility, where more produce was being washed, sorted and packaged for distribution. The operation was impressive, clean, efficient and surprisingly eco-conscious, with solar panels on the roof and a sophisticated water recycling system. "Most of our organic produce goes to high-end restaurants and specialty markets in the city," Thomas explained as they watched workers carefully pack fragrant herbs. "The demand for sustainable, locally grown food has exploded in the last few years." Olivia thought of the countless fancy restaurants she'd dined at with her family, never considering where the farm-to-table ingredients actually came from. "Do you supply Harringtons?" she asked, naming an exclusive restaurant her father frequently took business associates to. Thomas nodded. "They're one of our biggest clients. Why?" "Nothing," Olivia said with a small, ironic smile. "Just thinking about how I've probably been eating your food for years without knowing it." The final stop on their tour was the main house, the grand structure she'd glimpsed from the hilltop. Up close, it was even more impressive, a beautiful blend of traditional farmhouse architecture and modern design. "My father built the original house," Thomas said as he led her up the front steps. "I expanded it about 5 years ago, but tried to keep the same feeling." Inside, the home was surprisingly warm and inviting despite its size, unlike her family's mansion with its mew. Some like formality, Thomas's house felt lived in. Comfortable furniture, local artwork, shelves filled with books on agriculture and sustainability. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the property, bringing the outdoors in. "It's beautiful," Olivia admitted reluctantly, running her hand along a wooden table that looked handcrafted. "But you chose to live in the caretaker's cottage instead?" Thomas leaned against the kitchen counter. "I go back and forth, actually. When the business gets overwhelming or when I have official visitors, I stay here. But most days I prefer the simplicity of the old place. Keeps me grounded, reminds me where all this started. Olivia studied him, seeing him in a new light. You're not at all what Eleanor described. And what exactly did dear Eleanor say about me? Thomas asked, a hint of bitterness in his tone. Not much. Just that you were a struggling farmer who needed help. Olivia paused. She implied you were barely making ends meet. Called it a character-building experience for me. Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. Eleanor always did have a flair for manipulation. I'm surprised she even remembered my existence after all these years. How do you know her anyway? Olivia asked, her curiosity finally getting the better of her. Thomas was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. We grew up in the same town about an hour from here. Our families knew each other. We were close at one point. Something in his tone made Olivia's eyes widen. Wait, were you two together? Yes, briefly. Thomas moved to the window, looking out over his land. This was all my father's farm then, much smaller than it is now. I was working summers here while going to agricultural college. What happened? Eleanor had bigger ambitions than being a farmer's wife, he said simply. When a wealthy businessman passing through town showed interest in her, she made her choice. That businessman was your father, I believe. Olivia felt as if the floor had shifted beneath her feet. My father? But that doesn't make sense. He didn't meet Eleanor until after my mother died. I was 13. Thomas turned to look at her, surprise evident on his face. That's not the story I heard. Eleanor told me she married Richard Bennett right after she left here. No, Olivia said firmly. My mother was Grace Bennett. She and my father were married for 15 years before she died of cancer. Eleanor came into the picture 2 years later. Thomas frowned. Are you certain about the timeline? Of course I'm certain, Olivia replied, annoyed. It was my life. My mother died when I was 11. My father met Eleanor at some charity function when I was 13, and they married 6 months later. Understanding dawned on Thomas's face. So Eleanor lied. Not just to you, but to me as well. All those years ago, she told me she was leaving to marry a rich businessman named Richard. I never knew his last name, never made the connection even when she called about you. But why would she? Olivia began, then stopped as a new possibility occurred to her. When exactly did Eleanor leave town? Thomas thought for a moment. It would have been the summer of 2001, June, I think. Olivia did the math quickly. I was born in February 2002. They looked at each other, the implications hanging in the air between them. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, Thomas said carefully. Coincidences happen. True, Olivia agreed, her mind racing. But it might explain why Eleanor has always seemed to hate me on some level. Even before I supposedly embarrassed her by being overweight or clumsy or whatever else she criticized. They were both quiet for a moment, processing this new information. Does your father know you're here specifically? Thomas finally asked. With me, I mean. Olivia shook her head. I don't think so. Eleanor handled all the arrangements. He just went along with it like he always does with her ideas. Interesting, Thomas murmured. So she sent you to me without telling your father who I was to her. And without telling me who you really were beyond her stepdaughter. She's playing some kind of game, Olivia said, anger building inside her, using both of us as pieces. The question is, what's her endgame? Thomas asked. What does she get out of sending you here? Olivia paced across the kitchen. Maybe she just wanted to punish me like always. Maybe she thought farm work would be especially humiliating for someone she sees as soft and spoiled. Or maybe, Thomas said slowly, she wanted to get you out of the way for some reason. 6 months is a long time to send someone away as just a punishment. The possibility sent a chill through Olivia. What could be happening back home that Eleanor needed her absent for? Her father had always been somewhat distant, but he'd never been cruel. Would he really allow Eleanor to manipulate their lives to this extent? I need to call my father, she said suddenly. Thomas nodded, pulling his cell phone from his pocket and handing it to her. Use mine. Better reception than at the farmhouse. Olivia took the phone but then hesitated, her finger hovering over the keypad. What exactly would she say? Hi, Dad. Just checking if my stepmother has some nefarious plan that required shipping me off to her ex-boyfriend's farm. You know what? She said, setting the phone down. I think I need to process all this first. Figure out what's actually going on before I make accusations. Wise choice, Thomas agreed. In my experience, Eleanor rarely does anything without multiple layers of motivation. Best to understand the full picture before confronting her. They drove back to the small farmhouse mostly in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. As they pulled up to the familiar building, Olivia felt a strange mix of emotions. What had seemed like a simple punishment had evolved into something far more complex. A web of old relationships, possible secrets, and unclear motives. "So," Thomas said as he parked the truck, "now that you've seen everything, what's your plan? Still want to stay and work?" "I meant what I said about there being a place for your business skills here." Olivia looked at the farmhouse, then back toward the ridge that hid the larger operation from view. "Yes," she said with new determination. "I'm staying, but not just to learn farming or business. I want to understand exactly why Eleanor sent me here, what she's trying to achieve. And when I go back, I want to be prepared." Thomas studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right then. We start tomorrow. The real work, not just the basics you've been doing." That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She sat at the small desk in her room, making notes on everything she knew and everything she'd learned today. The timeline of Eleanor leaving town and her own birth. The strange coincidence of being sent specifically to Thomas's farm. The fact that her father seemed unaware of the connection between his wife and the farmer. None of it made complete sense yet, but one thing was becoming clear. Eleanor had underestimated both her and Thomas. She'd assumed Olivia would be miserable in a rural setting, too soft for physical labor, too spoiled to adapt, and she'd apparently assumed Thomas was still the struggling farmer she'd known years ago, someone who would perhaps take out old resentments on the stepdaughter of the woman who'd rejected him. Instead, Olivia had found unexpected strength and skills within herself, and Thomas had built an impressive agricultural empire that put even the Bennett family wealth in perspective. Over the next few weeks, Olivia threw herself into learning every aspect of the operation. Mornings were still spent on the small farm, tending to the animals and garden that had become her responsibility. But afternoons now found her shadowing Thomas through the business side of things, reviewing contracts with distributors, analyzing crop yields, learning about sustainable farming methods that could increase profits while decreasing environmental impact. To her surprise, the business degree that Eleanor had always dismissed as useless, "What does a wealthy man's daughter need with business skills?" proved invaluable. Olivia had a natural head for numbers and a fresh perspective that Thomas and his longtime employees appreciated. One evening, as they reviewed the quarterly financial reports in Thomas's office in the main house, Olivia noticed a potential issue with one of their biggest distribution contracts. "This clause here," she said, pointing to a paragraph buried in the legal text. "It allows them to reduce their purchase commitment by up to 30% with only 2 weeks' notice. That's a huge risk for us, especially with the perishable produce." Thomas looked impressed. "Good catch. That was added in the last renewal and our lawyer missed it. I'll have them renegotiate that section before we sign the extension." "You could also consider diversifying your distribution channels," Olivia suggested. "Maybe developing direct relationships with smaller, local restaurants instead of relying so heavily on the big distributors." As she talked through her idea, sketching out a potential marketing plan on a notepad, Thomas watched her with growing respect. The shy, insecure young woman who had arrived 3 months ago had been replaced by someone confident, insightful, and passionate. Physical changes were evident too. The demanding work had transformed Olivia's body, not into some idealized thin shape that Eleanor would approve of, but into a strong, capable form that matched her growing inner confidence. Her face had thinned slightly, showing off cheekbones and a determined jaw. Her arms and legs had developed muscle definition from daily physical work. But most noticeable was how she carried herself, head high, shoulders back, no longer trying to shrink or disappear. The most significant change, though, was in how she thought about herself. Working on the farm, contributing meaningful ideas to the business, being valued for her mind rather than criticized for her appearance. All of it had shifted her self-perception radically. "You know," Thomas said one day as they walked through fields of organic tomatoes, "your stepmother may have intended this as a punishment, but I think she inadvertently did you a favor." Olivia smiled. "I've been thinking the same thing. I needed to get away from that toxic environment, even if it happened for all the wrong reasons." Sometimes life's best gifts come disguised as its worst moments, Thomas replied. My father used to say that. As Olivia continued to immerse herself in both the agricultural and business aspects of Miller Farm, she also began developing her own ideas. Drawing on her business education and newfound practical experience, she created a proposal for an educational component to the farm, hosting school groups, offering workshops on sustainable agriculture, even developing an internship program for college students studying agricultural science or business. We have this amazing operation, she explained excitedly to Thomas as they reviewed her detailed business plan. Why not share the knowledge, build community connections, and create additional revenue streams at the same time? Thomas studied the spreadsheets and marketing materials she'd prepared. This is impressive, Olivia. Really impressive. You've thought of aspects I wouldn't have considered. So can I run with it? She asked eagerly. Yes, he nodded. Start small. Maybe one school group and one weekend workshop series. But yes, let's do it. It aligns perfectly with our sustainability mission. As Olivia worked to implement her education initiative, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Genuine pride in her accomplishments. Not the hollow praise of being a good girl for following Eleanor's restrictive rules, but real satisfaction in creating something meaningful through her own efforts and vision. What neither Olivia nor Thomas realized was that their working relationship had begun to shift subtly into something deeper. The long hours spent planning projects, the shared meals discussing business ideas, the occasional personal conversations about their pasts, all were laying a foundation of mutual respect and understanding that went beyond employer and employee. But as the fourth month of Olivia's punishment drew to a close, the outside world began to intrude on the sanctuary they had created. One evening, as Olivia was finishing up paperwork in the office they now shared, her phone buzzed with a text message, the first contact from her family since she'd arrived at the farm. It was from her father. Eleanor has arranged your return next month. Arthur Blackwell's son will be visiting. Eleanor thinks you two would make a good match. Time to come home and resume your proper life. Olivia stared at the message, a cold feeling spreading through her chest. Arthur Blackwell was one of her father's business associates, a man even wealthier than Richard Bennett, with a son notorious for his playboy lifestyle and disastrous relationships. Everything okay? Thomas asked, noticing her expression. Olivia handed him the phone wordlessly. He read the message, his face darkening. So that's Eleanor's game, he said quietly. Get you out of the way while she arranges a socially advantageous marriage, then bring you back when everything's set up. Like I'm a piece of furniture being moved around to suit the decor, Olivia said bitterly. Thomas set the phone down carefully. What do you want to do? Olivia looked around the office. At the business plan they'd been developing together, at the calendar marked with upcoming school group visits, at the prototype logo she'd designed for their new farm-to-table initiative. Then she thought about returning to her old life. The restrictive rules, the constant criticism, the smothering sense of being trapped in someone else's vision for her life. I don't want to go back, she said, the realization crystallizing as she spoke the words. Not to that life, not to being that person. Then don't, Thomas said simply. It's not that easy, Olivia sighed. My father is an adult who has chosen to enable your stepmother's behavior, Thomas finished for her. You're 23, Olivia. Legally and practically, you can make your own decisions. He was right, she knew. Yet years of conditioning had left her doubting her ability to stand on her own. What would I even do? Where would I go? You could stay here, Thomas said, his voice carefully neutral. The education program is your creation. You should see it through. And there's plenty more work if you want it. Olivia looked at him, trying to read his expression. Was he offering just a job? Or something more? And what did she want it to be? Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again with another message from her father. Eleanor has also scheduled you for a consultation with Dr. Weaver when you return. She thinks you might benefit from some adjustments now that you've lost weight. Olivia knew exactly what that meant. Dr. Weaver was a plastic surgeon Eleanor had been pushing her toward for years, suggesting everything from liposuction to facial refinements. A wave of anger washed over her, stronger than anything she'd felt before. Eleanor had sent her away, expecting her to be miserable, hoping she'd return desperate for approval, and willing to undergo whatever improvements were deemed necessary to secure an advantageous marriage. Instead, Olivia had found her strength, her confidence, and potentially a new path forward. The question now was whether she had the courage to choose that path over the one that had been laid out for her since childhood. Looking up at Thomas, whose patient presence had become a steady comfort these past months, Olivia made her decision. "Tell me more about this job offer," she said, a determined smile spreading across her face. The Bennett family estate looked exactly as Olivia remembered it. Imposing stone walls, manicured gardens, and an atmosphere of chilly perfection. Yet after 5 months away, it no longer felt like home. As the taxi crunched up the long gravel driveway, Olivia took a deep breath, steadying herself for what was to come. She hadn't told her father or Eleanor she was coming. The element of surprise was essential to her plan. After receiving those text messages a month ago, she'd spent weeks preparing, consulting with a lawyer Thomas recommended, organizing documents, and gathering the courage for this confrontation. The front door opened before she could even knock, revealing Stevens, the family butler, whose usually impassive face showed a flicker of surprise. "Miss Bennett, we weren't expecting you until next week." "Hello, Stevens," Olivia smiled. "I decided to come early. Are my father and Eleanor home?" "Your father is in his study. Mrs. Bennett is at her charity committee meeting but should return shortly." "Perfect," Olivia said, stepping inside. The familiar scent of lemon polish and Eleanor's preferred expensive flowers filled the air. "I'll see my father first." As she walked through the mansion, Olivia was struck by how cold it felt. All marble surfaces and perfect furnishings that no one was allowed to truly enjoy. How different from the warmth of Thomas's farmhouse, where furniture was chosen for comfort rather than status, where mud on the floor just meant you'd had a productive day outside. She knocked on her father's study door, entering when she heard his distracted, "Come in." Richard Bennett looked up from his computer, shock registering on his face. "Olivia, what are you doing here? We weren't expecting you until the Blackwell's son was here to inspect the merchandise." Olivia finished for him, keeping her voice even as she took a seat across from him without waiting for an invitation. Her father had the grace to look uncomfortable. "That's not fair. Arthur's son is a good match for you, successful from a good family." Eleanor thought. "Yes, let's talk about what Eleanor thinks," Olivia interrupted. "And perhaps about who Eleanor really is." Richard Bennett frowned, setting aside his reading glasses. "What's gotten into you? This attitude isn't like you, Olivia." "Actually, Dad, this is exactly like me. The real me. The one who's been suppressed for years trying to fit Eleanor's idea of who I should be." Olivia leaned forward. "Did you know she dated Thomas Miller before she met you?" Her father's expression didn't change. "Of course. Eleanor told me all about her past when we got serious." This wasn't the reaction Olivia had expected. "She told you? But then why would she send me specifically to his farm?" "Because Thomas is a decent, hardworking man who Eleanor thought might instill some of those qualities in you," Richard replied, his tone suggesting this should have been obvious. "She said you needed to see how the real world works, away from all." He gestured vaguely at their surroundings. "This." Olivia studied her father, trying to reconcile his words with everything she'd learned. "So you knew exactly who I was staying with these past 5 months? You knew Thomas's history with Eleanor?" "Yes," Richard nodded. "Though I gather from your tone that perhaps you didn't know until recently." "She told me he was a poor farmer barely making ends meet," Olivia said. Richard actually laughed at that. "Poor? Thomas Miller, hardly. His agricultural business is one of the most successful in the state. I've even invested in some of his expansion projects." Olivia felt as if the ground was shifting beneath her. "You've invested? So you've been in business with him all this time?" "Not directly," her father clarified. "Through one of my investment groups. I doubt Thomas even knows I'm one of his backers. Eleanor suggested the investment years ago, actually. So, she knew the family and they were smart operators." This new information forced Olivia to recalibrate her understanding of the situation. If her father had known all along where she was, if he was even financially connected to Thomas's business, then Eleanor's motivations for sending her away must be different than she'd assumed. Before she could process this fully, the study door opened and Eleanor herself swept in. immaculately dressed as always in a designer suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled. "Richard, Stephen said Olivia has returned early." She stopped short when she saw Olivia sitting across from her husband. "Well, this is unexpected." "Hello, Eleanor," Olivia said calmly, rising to her full height. The months of physical work had changed her body, making her stronger and more confident in her movements. She was no longer the cowering young woman who tried to make herself smaller under Eleanor's critical gaze. Eleanor's eyes narrowed as she took in Olivia's appearance. The simple but well-fitting jeans, the crisp button-down shirt, the healthy glow to her skin, and most of all, the straight-backed posture and direct gaze. "I see country living has agreed with you," she said, voice cool, "though we'll need to get you properly dressed before the Blackwells arrive. I've scheduled appointments with my stylist and Dr. Weaver for—" "No!" Olivia interrupted, the single word falling like a stone into the quiet room. "I won't be meeting with the Blackwells or your stylist, or certainly not with Dr. Weaver." Eleanor's perfect eyebrows rose. "Excuse me?" "I said no," Olivia repeated, her voice stronger. "I'm 23 years old, Eleanor. I'm an adult, and I'm done letting you make decisions about my body, my life, or my future." "Olivia," her father began, a warning note in his voice. "It's all right." "Richard," Eleanor said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Olivia has clearly picked up some rustic notions during her time away. She'll readjust to civilization soon enough." Olivia laughed, genuinely amused by Eleanor's condescension. "That's where you're wrong." "I'm not staying." "Don't be ridiculous," Eleanor scoffed. "Of course you're staying. The arrangement with Thomas was for 6 months. You have another month to go, and then you'll resume your proper place here." "My proper place?" Olivia echoed. "And what exactly is that, Eleanor? Ornamental daughter? Future trophy wife for the son of Dad's business associate? Perpetual disappointment because I don't fit your ideal image?" "Enough, Olivia," her father said sharply. "You will not speak to your stepmother that way." Olivia turned to him, disappointment washing over her. "You still don't see it, do you? All these years, how she's treated me. The constant criticism, the undermining, the way she's convinced you that I'm somehow deficient because I don't match her standards. Eleanor has only ever wanted what's best for you," her father insisted. "She's tried to help you improve yourself, find direction. By shipping me off to her ex-boyfriend's farm as punishment?" Olivia challenged. "It wasn't a punishment," Eleanor interjected smoothly. "It was an opportunity for growth, which you clearly needed. And judging by your improved appearance, it worked." Olivia shook her head, finally understanding. "That's all you see, isn't it? My improved appearance. Not my skills, not my ideas, not my happiness. Just whether I look acceptable enough to parade in front of the Blackwells." "Don't be dramatic," Eleanor sighed. "Of course we care about your happiness. Arthur's son is a catch. Any girl would be lucky." "I'm not any girl," Olivia cut in. "I'm a woman with my own mind, my own goals, and as of today, my own life separate from this family." Richard Bennett stood up, face reddening. "Now listen here, young lady." "No, Dad, you listen." Olivia pulled several documents from her bag, placing them on his desk. "These are the papers for the trust fund Mom left me, which matures when I turn 25 or get married, whichever comes first. I've had a lawyer review them. There's no provision that gives you or Eleanor control over who I marry, where I live, or what I do with my life." Her father stared at the papers. "How did you get these?" "From the family attorney. Turns out Mr. Harrison was more than happy to discuss my legal rights with me directly." Olivia slid another document forward. "And this is my resignation from the Bennett Family Foundation Board, effective immediately." Eleanor stepped forward, all pretense of warmth gone. "You ungrateful little—" "Careful, Eleanor," Olivia warned. "Insulting me won't work anymore. Neither will your manipulation or your criticisms. You think you can just walk away?" Eleanor's voice was tight with anger. "After everything we've done for you? The opportunities, the connections, the constant reminders that I wasn't good enough? The thinly veiled suggestions that my worth was tied to my appearance? The way you convinced my father that I needed fixing?" Olivia shook her head. "Yes, I'm walking away from all of that. I should have done it years ago." Her father seemed genuinely confused. "But where will you go? What will you do?" "I've accepted a position as Director of Educational Programs at Miller Agricultural Enterprises," Olivia said, unable to keep a note of pride from her voice. "The farm education initiative I developed has already secured grants and partnerships with 3 school districts. I'll be living on the property and overseeing the program's expansion. Eleanor's face went very still. You're going to work for Thomas? Live with him? I'm going to work with Thomas, Olivia corrected. As a valued business partner. Something you clearly wouldn't understand, since you only see relationships in terms of what people can do for your social standing. And are you and Thomas? Her father began, then trailed off, unsure how to phrase the question. Olivia's expression softened slightly. Thomas has been kind, respectful, and supportive. Everything a friend should be. Anything beyond that is frankly none of your business right now. The truth was more complex. Over the past month, as she'd worked closely with Thomas to develop her education program and plan her independent future, their relationship had deepened beyond employer and employee, beyond even friendship. There was a growing connection between them, based on mutual respect and genuine understanding, that might someday evolve into something more, but Olivia wasn't ready to put a label on it yet, and certainly not for Eleanor's benefit. This is absurd, Eleanor declared. Working on a farm? Living in the countryside? You'll be back within a month begging for your old life back. Olivia smiled, genuinely amused by Eleanor's fundamental misunderstanding. That's where you made your mistake, Eleanor. You thought sending me to a farm would be a punishment. You thought I'd hate the physical work, the distance from city conveniences, the separation from the social world you value so highly. She moved toward the door, turning back for one final look at her father and stepmother. But what you never understood is that I was never happy in your world to begin with. I was just too afraid to leave it. So in a strange way, I should thank you. Your punishment turned out to be exactly what I needed, the push to find my own path. Richard Bennett stood, his expression torn between anger and confusion. Olivia, think about what you're doing, the opportunities you're throwing away. I am thinking, Dad, clearly for the first time in years. She paused, her voice softening. I love you. I always will.